So good morning, folks, and welcome to the June and last cafe before the summer break of SRITC. So it's the Scottish Rural Islands Transport Community, and our guests today and hosts today are the International Transport Forum, and it's Lucy and Laurie, and I'll let them introduce themselves in a moment. But just before we kick off, the usual housekeeping rules apply. If you just joined us, please do introduce yourself in the chat box. And we're all about being positive and enthusiastic and sharing ideas. And as I said, we're recording the session so that we can share it with those that can't manage to come today. So just quickly, because I know we've got a few people that haven't been to a cafe before, I just want to let you know what SRITC is all about. Some weird and wonderful pictures here. These are from our convention last year when I did a what do you call it, a hunt, a scavenger hunt for people when we were all in our homes and offices to find something that began with an S, an R, an I, a T and a C. So this is what people came up with, including an ice hockey stick, which I think is fantastic. And at the bottom there you've got cake. You may wonder what BYOC means, but it's bring your own cake. So I usually go around and ask everybody what they've got for cake, but today, in the courtesy of time, I'll hang fire on that. But you can see there, we made some cookies. So that's my son and I making some cookies for today. So we're very much a sharing and supporting group of people, not just only based in Scotland, but throughout the world, that are very passionate about everything rural. So therefore, we're very resourceful. And if you've got a question and you want the answer to it, we probably know the answer or can point you in the right direction. We're also quite an inspirational bunch of folk. And we obviously work together as a team, trying to help crack problems and make things happen. But more importantly, we're a community of enthusiastic individuals. And today I'm really looking forward to hearing what Lucy and Laurie have to tell us about the ITF work that's been going on. The big news for me is that I started SRITC at the end of 2017, and as of about 10 days ago, we are now an established community interest company, so a KIC. So that's been a massive achievement in our journey. So I want to thank everybody that's helped me through that journey, and obviously for all of you that have been coming along for the last year, and particularly online and to the conferences. We're going from strength to strength. Just briefly before I hand over, we had the special cafe on Tuesday, which was the STEM cafe. Now, for those of you that don't know about STEM, it's about science and inspiring young people through schools. So this was in collaboration with an organisation down in Shropshire, and they've got a challenge out at the moment for young children about sustainable travel and rural mobility. And hopefully they're going to come up with some suggestions on how we can improve rural mobility and some solutions. And the competition they're running closes in September, and we're going to take their solutions and ideas at our gathering at the end of September and see if we can make them reality. So that was great, and it's really fantastic to be involved trying to inspire young people. On a personal note, if you're in Scotland and you have contacts in the Cairngorm National Park, I would really love it if you could help me disseminate out a survey, a visitor travel survey for my part-time PhD. There will also be another opportunity next week. I'll have more information that I give you a QR code and a link for anywhere in the world for visitors to partake in this rural mass visitor travel survey. So we're not only doing it in the Cairngorm National Park, but it is going global. So more of that later, but if you can help me out, that would be great. Just let me know. And finally, before I hand over to the guys, yes, we have the gathering happening on the 30th of September. Alex will be putting the link in the chat box for you. You can sign up. It's free to attend at the moment. So what we'd like you to be able to do is join us, and it's starting at 1 o'clock UK time. And we've got a huge number of sessions, games planned, and there will be, aside from my introduction PowerPoint, no other PowerPoints all day. We're starting 1 o'clock with friends from the Netherlands and from Sweden talking about their rural mass projects. And we're going to finish in the evening at UK time at 5:30, and this is going to be a socializing, networking opportunity on your doorstep. So when you sign up, we'll need to know whereabouts you're based, and then we'll organise for people to meet in a park or a cafe and just have a bit of socializing. Obviously, regulations and guidance permitting, but hopefully, even if it's only 3 of you, it'll be nice to get a bit of a gathering together of people of like-minded. So Alex will share that information with you. I need to change my slides over. So I will give you Laurie and Lucy to introduce themselves as I change slides to provide their presentation. Laurie.
Okay, me first. Yeah. Hi, I'm Laurie Pickup. I'm the international director at SLR Consulting, which is a global consulting thing. I've been involved in rural transport since the old Routex experiments in 1976 with I think it was the Department of the Environment then, not Transport, and been involved pretty much with rural transport right the way through the last decades, including the ITS advances in the 90s and the sustainable mobility work in recent decades. And I'm chairing the group, although I have to say that the main energy behind it is Lucy, who's been a real energy over the months. But it's a pleasure to be able to chair the group, and we hope you can help us in formulating our final results. And this is a bit of a sounding board. I'm looking forward to this. So I'll hand over to Lucy now.
So you're going to have to be patient with me. I'm going to do Lucy's slides. Laurie, could you just mute yourself slightly because I can hear your fan. I know it's 30+ degrees, but could you just mute yourself, please?
It's not working at the moment, but anyway.
Maybe that's my computer, as usual.
Oh, it might be. It might be. Anyway, I'll introduce you to Lucy, and she's just going to give me the nod, and I'm going to do the slides for her. So over to you, Lucy.
All right. Yeah, I'm Lucy Kirstein. I'm a policy analyst at the International Transport Forum at the OECD. Those who don't know the International Transport Forum, it's a forum of 63 member countries, and we have our offices at the OECD in Paris. And our members are transport ministries, and these transport ministries also are the members of this working group. So we have around 20 to 30, depending on their proactiveness, depending on their activity, nominated government officials, but also academics and other experts. And this group is chaired by Laurie. So he's helped us organize meetings and chair them. And yeah, just to go back, thanks. The overall vision for this group, and we've been discussing this a long time. So the actual problem was here that some countries wanted to look at how can we provide, or how can we improve access for all, but some countries also are looking into decarbonization strategies and modal shift. But the main focus at this point should be providing convenient and affordable access to basic services and activities for people without access to a car in areas where public transport is difficult to sustain financially. And so the question was, how can basic accessibility be provided in a more innovative and cost-effective way in rural areas? And the next slide shows the rural continuum that we're actually looking at. And again, we had the issue of several member countries with different preferences and different priorities, some with a stronger focus on the urban periphery and access to public transport and other modes there, and other countries who have a much stronger focus on connecting their sparsely populated and remote areas. So the challenge was to look at the full continuum of these geographic areas. The next slide is just to give you an overview of the approach we've taken. So we have 5 different subgroups who in the last couple of months have been working on specific subtopics of mobility, of innovative mobility for the periphery. And those groups have looked at and collected over 80 innovative mobility project case studies. And throughout the last year, we had several webinars, but also plenary meetings to discuss the interim results that the subgroups have been working on. And the next slide shows you what kind of, within the rural mobility landscape, what kind of transport types we were looking at. So within the ride-sharing segment, we looked at, well, shared rides in a broader sense. We looked at public transport provision, we looked at taxis and ride pooling, we looked at carpooling, but also hitchhiking forms that are more formalized. In the asset sharing segment, we looked at car sharing and also to a certain extent bike sharing and how this could work potentially in rural areas. And finally, integration. So both looking at the digital infrastructure, so more the rural mass side, but also the physical infrastructure with mobility hubs and other planning tools that can help this intermodality improvement. Okay, and the next one just shows you a quick overview of how we went about this. So we looked at the service types, the definitions and common features, and how this fits into rural areas, or how this has been applied in rural areas. We looked at the geographic context. Where is this solution, this specific solution, suitable? We looked at the potential benefits, and we looked at the implementation constraints, ranging from operational challenges towards the more acceptance or behavioral constraints that you can find with a solution. Of course, also covering the economic and legal aspects. On the geographic side, we've seen that there are different types of mobility services that fit to different contexts. And so maybe you can also give us feedback on this. We've been discussing what type of solutions could work in which geographic context. So what we've done is we have a graph here on the horizontal axis. You have a continuum going from a sparse settlements to more nuclear settlements, so more grouped together housing, and on the other axis you have a continuum going from very low density to high density overall, so in terms of people per square kilometer. And there are different types of services. Maybe we have more time to discuss this later, that would be most suitable and where governments could focus their efforts on providing those. So in terms of findings, we've been discussing this a lot as well. There is, of course, a strong potential for demand responsive transport, especially in areas where you already have a public transport service in place, or you have other subsidized services, for example, paratransit and school transport and others that are there. And once you pool them together, there could be a potential for reducing cost for the public sector. But where these services do not exist, it's more difficult for authorities to set up these services, as the costs can be sometimes prohibitive. And we've seen that in the pilots that we've examined, it was really difficult to maintain services beyond the pilot phases. Some were actually stopped. There is also a question about the right split between traditional fixed line public transport and flexible transport. Can be a challenge, and there are a lot of questions that factor into this decision. there are many decisions that need to be taken around the type of service and the category of operators when assessing the value for money in these areas. So it really depends on what you have available and where can you draw the line between DRT complementing or replacing traditional public transport. In addition, there are more and more communities looking at volunteer-based transportation. That's extremely popular to limit costs, but it also relies on proactive and skilled local associations. So then the services might not be as resilient as a normal operator, and it needs, of course, a favorable policy environment. And then finally, we've also looked at autonomous buses, and that's, of course, currently constrained due to remaining technical constraints and also the upfront costs. There is, of course, great value. What we've seen in rural areas, there's some hybrid solutions that are developing, and I think the most potential lies in these hybrid solutions. So where you have community vehicles that can be used by a number of different associations. You can combine e-car sharing services, but also solidarity ride sharing. And these examples we've seen, for example, in Germany and Finland. When it comes to mobility as a service in rural areas, the goal is very different to the mass that we look at in urban areas. And of course, the core is really to increase efficiency and utilization rate of the shared transportation options that you have there, and maintaining sufficient service levels and improving accessibility for people. And the main benefit through this would be to integrate shared first and last mile services, so that you can actually, well, you need to have the services in place before setting up mass, of course, and there the strong value is there in connecting these last miles. And we've seen, of course, that there are different models, and we can go into a bit more detail later. There are really different approaches to rural mass in Europe, in Japan, and the United States. And that's these are the very high level findings. To say that what we've seen is that the rise of mobility innovation currently happens within a context of very severe deficits. So these deficits can be found at multiple levels, including policy, programs, service provision, funding, institutional and organizational capacities, and of course also the knowledge of needs in rural areas. I'll skip the next one because it's more contentious, and we might have time to discuss this at the end. But these are the 9 high-level recommendations that we wanted to discuss with you. So what we could do is going through them one by one, and I think Jenny could take over again and make this more of a conversation between all of us.
I was actually going to ask you and Laurie just to keep your mics available rather than muted, because I was going to ask you both, what do you mean by need for strategic policy? And I've got to guess what Laurie might say to this, but are we looking at something at a regional level? Are we looking at something at a country level, or are we looking at something bigger? Laurie, what's your thinking on this?
There's different levels. I think one thing that worries me at the moment is at a European level, there's a renewed emphasis in urban going forward on the next 7-year programs, and any mention of rural seems to have dropped off the apple cart. I don't know how much we can rely on anything European, but certainly at national level, the UK government are currently having a look at this, aren't they? It'd be interesting to see what they come out with. But we certainly need strategic policy. In the work we did on Smarter, there were only 4 countries in extended Europe that we looked at, about 32 countries, that actually had a strategic policy for rural transport. The point I would make is that most of the policies that are developed for rural areas come from people who live in urban areas and have an urban mindset. What we need to do is to switch the mindset so any strategic policy has its base from rural areas. I think that's very, very important, and speak the rural language.
It's very difficult for me to see if anybody's got their hand up if they want to say anything. So it's either a virtual hand or a physical hand, because the screen sharing on Zoom doesn't allow you to see everybody's faces.
I'd also like to add something to that.
Yep, go for it.
I think the core focus here is to shift from what we have currently. So the currently prevailing approach is a program-based support where you have rural mobility funds, for example. But a policy-based approach would be more what Flanders is currently doing, to define what is the core network, what are the complementing services that feed this core network, so that we have a basic accessibility approach that guarantees a basic accessibility or a lifeline service to all. So that would be more the policy, really the strategic approach that looks on all different levels.
I don't think there's anybody here that's going to disagree with you, and I don't see any hands up here. So I'm just going to keep going, and if people have got something they want to contribute, please do make your waves or put something in the chat box so I can see the chat box easier. I'm going to actually jump to number 4, and I'm going to ask you to explain what a sandbox is, so that people know what a set up a regulatory sandbox means.
Okay, so I mean, Laurie, if you'd like to start.
Leave that one with you. This is the American idea, isn't it? But I'll leave that with you.
So there is, some of you might be familiar with that. There is the US DOT sandbox program for on-demand mobility, or for shared mobility, I think. But it's again an approach to provide funding to individual services. And what we're meaning here is setting up a regulatory sandbox. So that's not only to provide the financial support to services, but to set up a region, a test region, where you actually have a possibility to scale the solutions that you want to test, and to be able to actually observe effects on mobility. We think it would be valuable to just take one region and really test a large-scale transformation of the transport system over a 5 to 10 year time frame. And that can, of course, involve partnerships between different municipalities or leadership of a region. And this would involve, we call it regulatory sandbox, because it needs to involve that regulation changes so that these services can actually properly operate, not just with the financial support.
I think in some parts of Europe, I think you and I discussed this, they're referred to as living labs in a way as well. So they're not too dissimilar. I'm actually going to pick on a few people because I'm renowned for doing that. Andrew, are you there? Because I see your videos off. As somebody who's worked a lot in innovation and different aspects, what do you think to what's in front of you with regards to high-level recommendations? Is there anything there that you would disagree with or agree with? You might need to unmute yourself, Andrew.
I was just checking the 9. I'm going to agree with most of them, and I particularly like the regulatory sandbox removal. We currently have a bid in which might actually address that for the area covered by the Western Gateway and the bottom of the UK, because our public sector contact is the Western Gateway. But it's going to come down to whether or not the government believes that a rural solution provided by people based in rural areas is worth considering.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. If you read the consultation document, the first sentence suggests that they're looking for a eureka technological solution, and it then goes on. It then goes on to say that there are a number of things that they put into the urban consultation, and maybe some of those might work in rural areas. So I completely agree with you on that about the mindset. I think if we look at living labs, I think that's more like Lucy was describing for the America model. They tend to be experiments, but it's not a new thing. I mean, I was involved in the government's 3 trial areas for bus deregulation back in the 80s, when She Who Shall Not Be Named was in Downing Street. And they went on for a couple of years, and they did change the regulations, and I was involved in looking at the impacts of that. So it's not a new thing, and it could be something that maybe modern governments might be attracted to. Certainly good luck with your proposal.
I'm also now going to pick on 2 individuals, Thurston and Gordon, because wearing your community transport hats, if you're both still there, because I can't quite see you, I'd be really interested to know what you think about the recommendations, particularly thinking about things to do with regulations as well, and sort of more the technical side of things. Do one of you wish to pick that up? Gordon, Thurston, you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm kind of can pick up a little bit on that. Sorry, I'm kind of half listening into another meeting as well. So, yes, the terrible idea for any men, as we said earlier, men and multitasking. Yeah, I think from a community transport side of things, that's kind of strategic policy, and there needs to be that kind of breakdown and recognition at the national level for community transport. It can be quite restrictive. The sort of a lot of the funding from that is left to the local authorities, which means there's disparate kind of connections between what is and what is not funded. And then, yeah, just kind of internally as well. Obviously, we've got great guidance from the Community Transport Association, got very strict regulations to follow and what we can and can't do. But yeah, I think there's, especially kind of coming down to that more local level, a lot of what my role is at the moment is identifying what is going on within the communities. And there's lots of amazing startup solutions within a rural-based community where that's, you know, volunteer car schemes. It's like we say, it's coming a lot more reliance on volunteers than it is on paid commercial transport operations. That's my kind of experience so far. So yeah, it's obviously look a lot more forward to kind of what's coming out of that. And just some of these slides which we've put up before, I was looking at fantastic information. I will no doubt be borrowing elements from that as well from you, Lucille. So thank you very much.
Gordon?
And
yes, my particular hobby horse is this number 2 that you've got on the slide, a whole of government approach. That seems to be particularly difficult in linking rural areas with each other and with the more dense services around about. There has to be link there, and there has to be also an attitude amongst everybody concerned that people wanting to use rural public services, rural buses we're talking about now, or rural trains, that it has to be properly thought through, whereas these people mainly are not, they don't use them, they use cars. And then when you try and get them to change things, oh, well, we'll have to look at it. When we do a major review, then we'll look at the problems that you've identified. So I think there has to be a can-do, and we'll try very hard to do. The other thing which particularly sticks with me is the usability of the buses because of regulations handed down from people who don't use buses, such as, for instance, the exact fare only policy, which I've read about before. Why do we make it difficult for people to use? Why do we make it unfriendly for people to use? I think there's a lot of detailed work that needs to be done. And particularly there should be perhaps groups set up between authorities like Ayrshire and Dumfries and Galloway to talk to each other more about, well, people in Dumfries and Galloway might want to go to Glasgow for the day. At the moment they can't, because it's just that the timetable doesn't match, and it should match. There's no reason why it shouldn't, apart from the technical details about where the driver's got to be. So I think you've got to have people who have a can-do attitude, and we're going to make it do attitude that is supported from the top. I think that'll do for me. Thank you.
I was going to say, other Gordon from BSCTC. Gordon?
Yep, completely agree with what Thurston and Gordon said, but just particularly on flexible regulations, I think there's a real problem at the moment, and it's getting better, then getting worse, then getting better, then getting worse again with the Section 19 and Section 22 problems. So like, we're sometimes treated as a commercial operator and sometimes treated as a charity, third sector volunteer service, and we're not really given any flexibility on when to apply our permit or when we're a bus service. So you sometimes find that somebody who's got a bus pass can use it on one of our buses but can't use it on another, and don't understand why they have to pay sometimes and why it's free another time. And when you're in community transport, it's generally elderly or vulnerable people that you're dealing with, and it just makes the whole thing muddy. And I think there should be flexibility in that area and in many other areas, but I could go on all day about flexible regulations, so I'll leave it with that one.
Lucy, I'm just going around different groups of people that I know, and if I miss somebody that wants to say something, please don't take offence and shout at me, okay? But I think you're getting the consensus here that everybody's in agreement with these 9 recommendations. I'm actually going to throw to somebody who's never been to a cafe before, and that's Graham, who's joined us. And Bryony, if you're there and able to put on your camera, that'd be really useful, because I'm jumping here, but these 2 lovely individuals work for organisations in Scotland that they can explain, but it's maybe more from they fund things as well, quite kindly, see what they think to these recommendations from their angle. Graham, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Graham McQueen. I work for Pass for All, managing the Smarter Choices, Smarter Places Open Fund. It's a £2 million fund per annum, supported through Transport Scotland, and it's about basically reducing single-use car journeys, so active travel, sustainable travel, public transport, all sorts of things, as long as it gets people out of cars, basically. So one of the reasons I'm interested in the meeting today and the wider sort of scene around rural transport is that this is the 3rd year of the fund, and we've kind of highlighted that rural projects are something we're lacking in. We've got a few good projects, but we need a better balance between the more rural projects to get a better balance across the board. I mean, with the recommendations there, wholeheartedly agree with them all. I mean, obviously the ramp up government support for shared and active travel is something that's close to our hearts, because, you know, I think the Scottish government has been quite good at this recently. It could obviously do more, but I think, you know, the way the Scottish government is going and looking at its promises in its last election, then I think it's only going to get better in Scotland for this. Obviously, I don't know if that's across the board in other countries as well, but here it's certainly ramping up. So we're looking for projects to support in rural areas that will, you know, maybe pilot things. As a revenue fund we have, so it's about, it's not about buying vehicles, it's about support for these projects. So promotions of them, staff time, all this kind of thing. So yeah, I'm interested to hear what people would say. Anybody in Scotland I'm interested to hear from if you've got ideas for projects that would actually get practical changes and behaviour change happening on the ground.
So you've got a policy agreement there. I'm going to throw to Bryony, and it's nice to see a background of Bryony. So I'm throwing you in the deep end here from the Home Energy Scotland perspective. What do you think? Do you want to explain? Because we have people from Japan, France, etc., who might not know what Home Energy Scotland is.
Yeah, so quite complicated. Home Energy Scotland is operated by a company called Energy Saving Trust. So the 2 of us work together. So basically we are our own little bubble in a way. But Home Energy Scotland delivers advice on energy and transport for domestic and businesses across the UK, across Scotland. So the funding schemes, I'm on the business transport team, so that's where I'm from. And the funding schemes we've got is all to do with the likes of the active travel. So You know, obviously that ramp up government support for shared and active travel. We've got some in the Scottish Government, and we always, you know, transport coordinators are always like, yeah, we need a wee bit more. So we've got, you know, electric vehicle loan funding, e-bike trials, e-bike business loans and all that sort of thing, which is also all available to domestic customers as well through the Home Energy Scotland service. So again, I have to, you know, agree with all the recommendations as well, and, you know, happy to help anybody with any projects or whatever, and any transport advice. So yeah.
Fab, thanks, Bryony. I'm going to ask Ali McEnroy his thoughts before I go to my colleagues at the ITF, because as some of you know, I've been involved with some of this ITF with particularly the rural mass side of things. So yeah, I've lost everybody now on my screen. Where have you all gone? I'll take Brendan because your hand's gone up, but I'll come back to my others because I can't see your videos. Brendan?
Sorry.
Can't see you.
For me, the reason the sandbox one stands out is almost a philosophical one, which is, I think we must be very careful of sort of solipsistic views that the organizations and the sectors that we work in have the answer. And for me, finding solutions here is as much about not doing things as doing things. You know, if you look at a situation in rural Africa, for instance, where there are no, you know, layers of regulation and government and political aims and so on, people find solutions, don't they? So as an example, Britain probably, as this is an old hobby horse, I've mentioned this before, but Britain probably has one of the biggest fleets of electric vehicles in the world already, which is disability scooters. And government won't allow those to be used by able-bodied people. If you get on your grandma's disability scooter, you're breaking the law. But they go 4 miles an hour on pavements, 8 miles an hour on the road. They're no danger to anyone. They should be allowed in bicycle lanes. And that would solve for very many people the short distance mobility. Not just for the disabled, but for able-bodied people. If we could all buy and use those, so that's government getting off people's backs. And there are more complicated examples, obviously, but another thing that sticks out for me is that most of these are about top-down. They're about, you know, the experts doing something. And I would say also be mindful of looking down the other end of the telescope.
Okay. Fab, thank you. I'll come back to Lucy and Laurie on that. Ali, are you there or are you disappeared? Because I still can't find you on the screen. Are you here, Ali McEnroy, or has he disappeared? If he's disappeared, I'll go to Lucy and Laurie for comment. No, he's disappeared. Lucy, Laurie, what do you think so far?
Yeah, well,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Laurie?
first.
Okay. Yeah, I've taken notes. I think this is really helpful to get your views on that. Of course, you can also disagree, and you can also tell us, well, this is missing here, and this is something that we should add to this shopping list. I'm particularly interested to just connect to or link to Brendan's point. With the more bottom-up approach, and there I would like to point to the recommendations that we have, the number 8 on setting up technical assistance at the national or region level. So this is thought as a recommendation to provide a stable environment and a helpful environment to the bottom-up initiatives that are there, and people who want to change something on the ground. And so that would be something that I don't know if David Cobel is still here as well. He's someone who has actually inspired us to this recommendation, because he said, okay, the local authorities, they're often not, or local actors are not informed enough, or don't have the capacity sometimes, or the right people in their teams to do these projects. And it would be good to have technical assistance that these people could benefit from.
You're a mind reader, Lucy, because that's exactly who I was going to go to next as part of the working group for myself. David, do you want to contribute there? You might need to unmute.
Yes, hello everybody. Yes, on this point, effectively, the fact that we see in France, even if we have a huge evolution in terms of implementing local authorities in terms of mobility in all our French territories, we see that governance and moreover the way to contribute and to solve the issue of the project is crucially linked to the way to first how to finance the project on territories, and moreover we see a gap between low density areas and huge density areas. Mainly when we are on conurbation, it's quite easier to finance and to implement experimentation, innovation, and mobility project. And on rural area, we have a gap. Even if in France we have the specificity with a tax that is called versement mobilité. This is a tax that could be provided to all the firms that have more than 9 employers, in the way that the implementation of local policy contribute to the fact that people can use public transport and public mobility services in their daily home to work travels. Even if we have this tax, we see that this is very difficult in order to have a complete finance, a complete view of the way to finance the project. And the other aspect, indeed, is that in rural area, even if finance is crucial, another point is very crucial. This is the way to accompany territories and accompany the local authorities in technical expertise to implement the different mobility services. I mean, we have a gap and not the same competencies in the administrative services in local area than in conurbation, because historically in conurbation we have services that are very implemented due to the fact that there are for a long time local authorities for mobility, and in rural area it's quite new. So the way the issue is to implement a way to accompany this expertise and to increase the competence level thanks to this expertise in our rural area.
Fabulous, thank you. I'm going to go to another country because I know we're running out of time. And before we get to Japan, and I ask my Japanese colleagues, Martin, you were also involved with the working group. This is interesting to you. Do you want to unmute yourself and provide some feedback as well?
Yeah, thanks. I wanted actually to ask also a few questions if I'm allowed. Yeah, I find myself and I can identify with many of the recommendations, and I'm looking very much forward to see that document published in the end. And thanks also to the other contributors for providing me with new material on strange, weird ideas on how governments can regulate things and make life difficult in other places, especially in Britain for some reason. Perhaps there are too many Brits talking, providing their input here. Anyway, it was very interesting in that sense. And it's really weird, and planning and policy needs to take the ideas of sandboxes more seriously. I like that idea. I don't know much about how they work, but I like the idea. I hope they become more popular in the future. Yeah. perhaps question. I'll limit myself to 2 questions. One, as you've searched around the world, and several of you, include, especially Laurie, made the point of involving the rural people in these processes. Do you have any good ideas or good practices on how actually to involve the rural people? I agree that it is something that tends to be overlooked. Even me, I'm sitting in a state capital of 600,000 people, and I'm taking care of the countryside issues here as well, for example. And that's my first question. And the second question may be a bit like visionary or long-term in some sense. All these ideas and all this discussion is about making rural transport better, and providing sustainable alternatives to the car, to the use of the private car individually. But if we imagine with much fantasy a scenario of lots of climate change going on and people changing their habits and turning in large numbers to shared mobility and rural or the kind of services we imagine, what is the scaling up potential of these things? Is it easy to upscale them so that they can take, for example, not 5 or 10%, but 50% of the transport market? Or what challenges would we have ahead of us if we see that happen?
Right, Lucy, Laurie, we've only got 9 minutes left, and I'm sure we could run a whole cafe on Martin's questions.
Oh, yeah.
So we'll have to organise that for one of them further in the year. Which one of you wishes to answer first?
Well, if I can just come in, and thank you, Martin. Yeah. It links to Brennan's point. There are a lot of bottom-up initiatives, community initiatives, and I've heard some fabulous presentations on previous meetings of this webinar from Scotland. There's a need to have the flexibility to encourage these initiatives through microfinance, through micro-subsidy, through capacity assistance, and this really needs to have a thing. And I'm not saying that everything is transferable to another area, because every area has its own DNA. The Inuits have 20 words for snow. I notice in Scotland you've got about 6 or 7 different types of rural areas. In policy, you have urban or you have rural. This is the language is important here. And I think one thing that strikes me is, what are we looking at here? Are we looking to try and improve accessibility to basic services? In other words, a safety net for people who don't have access to cars, rather than an emphasis on trying to get a modal shift in rural areas. Most people in rural areas use cars, and we can't avoid the elephant in the room. They're part of the mix, and certainly on micro mobility, and I take that point about the scooters. I mean, people like Toyota are developing micro cars. I think Renault or Citroën have one that are small electric cars. So cars are part of the mix here. But I think we need to decide what we're really looking at is accessibility, and not trying to necessarily to get a modal shift to walking and cycling, although of course that is desirable.
Yeah, I see Lucy's answered a bit more of your question, Martin, in the chat. I'm going to be rude and move on a bit, because I've got 3 people with hands up, and we're meant to finish in about 4.5 minutes, which is going to be slightly over, folks, I'm afraid. But this is good, because it means everybody's got some comments to make. Azrul, you were the first with your hand up, so we'll go to Japan, but please keep it succinct if possible due to time.
Yeah, thank you. I was actually going to say similar to what Laurie says, but I was going to comment that because my OCD, I cannot see 9 points, I need to send 10. And I think one that might be probably consecutive to this one is the fact that we are talking, I think we should talk about accessibility rather than mobility, moving people. And I think that, at least from what I see in Japan, there's a lot of opportunities by integrating not only local transport that is run by, for example, commercial services, but also online the offer of, for example, small parcels, the offer of health access through online systems, all these kind of what digital services they are coming now. And also, like, for example, for farming, many farmers are selling their products through these kind of services. So I think another recommendation I think from my point of view, we should also look at the economic and socio-economic service, not only from the transport perspective. And I think this probably maybe should be stronger emphasized. That's all from my side.
Lucy, Laurie, do you want to say anything to that?
No.
She's done it in the chat. She's done it in the chat. Thank you, Lucy. Conscious of time. Thank you. Ronald, you were the next with your hand up.
Thanks, Jenny. Yes, it was just to, I mean, I think like most people probably agree with a large number of the high level recommendations there. Just kind of note one, the need for strategic policy. I think there is a question in terms of kind of what informs that policy as well, and you know, what data is going to be used specifically to inform that policy, and whether there's space to kind of put a bit more focus on kind of data-led recommendations, etc. One point I'd kind of maybe draw some attention to is plenty of people will be aware of the UK Levelling Up Fund, and that raising some eyebrows in terms of you know, where we're considered priority areas or not. And just kind of one point, this is actually available on Highland Council's website as well, the metrics for the UK Levelling Up Fund. And you had the one of the things, the measure need for improved transport connectivity. And it says, according to the methodology note, there was no publicly available data on journey times for Scotland and Wales or an equivalent alternative. So transport connectivity was not assessed in the Welsh and Scottish national indices. So I think it's one of these things that, you know, data is, you know, hugely important in this. And you know, when it comes to things like the Levelling Up Fund, it's had a significant impact on places like Highland, the lack of that information, if you like.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Ronald. Data always comes up as a theme, doesn't it? Last but not by means least, John Yellowlees. John.
Okay, and can you hear me?
Yep, go for it.
Yeah, I was amazed when I heard Laurie refer to the VUTEX experiments of 1977, because I was the secretary of the steering committee in the Department of Transport. I would love to compare notes with them separately. It was a completely top-down exercise by urban people designing urban solutions for the countryside. A colleague of mine told me he'd been amazed to discover that people in rural areas were just like people in urban areas. They wanted to go to the nearest town. They didn't want to cruise around rural parishes. So the department passed an act to make experimental changes in the law on taking money for petrol, but halfway through the experiments, they abandoned that and decided to change the law anyway. I couldn't understand why the experiments were not linking into trains. The buses were not connecting with trains in Devon, till I discovered files showing that the department was conspiring to close the railway line. So it's delightful now to record that not only is that railway line thriving, but the next door line is reopening this December. Some folks will be turning in their graves.
Yes, absolutely. I remember being caught up Wastwater in the Lake District on a post bus, which lasted for a little bit of time. But yes, the Cotswold Railway line in England is another great example of that, which was nearly closed.
Yes.
Yeah, we'll have to catch up on that one.
Yes, I've sent you an email.
Yes.
Right, I've stopped the share just now so that I can actually see more of you, which is great. It's the downside of Zoom, isn't it? Lucy, where are you? Where are you? Disappeared off my screen. Are you okay if we share the slides with the group that are here and that you can get some more feedback, or would you rather keep them under wraps at the moment?
Yeah, no, that's possible. Just a disclaimer that these are draft recommendations and this is just the first reality check, and that they're evolving as we speak. So
I'm wearing my SRITC hat, not my ITF hat, because obviously split personality on that one. I think I could 100% say that everybody here is behind those recommendations and fully supportive of those recommendations. And I think the question will be, how do we actually take these recommendations forward, and how do we make the change happen will be the next big question. So I can see that being a cafe at some point in the future. Would you not agree?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, or if Laurie gets his way, we have world domination and we all get together and have a rural conference somewhere in the world all together, and we make all of this happen. But I think we might have to wait a few more years, Laurie, for that to happen.
Yeah, well, I'm not going anywhere in the next few months, so it won't happen then.
Yeah, so I have to say thank you to Lucy and Laurie for joining today, and also to our friends from Japan, to Germany, to France, to Scotland for joining today. We will circulate this round. I see there's been quite a bit of stuff going on in the chat. We'll try and capture that for Lucy and Laurie as well. Alex has also put something in about the social workshops which are taking place anywhere in the world, so please just click on that link. We won't physically see you, as it were, but we will virtually see you at the gathering, which will be taking place on the 30th of September. So there's no more cafes in July or August because it's the summer holidays here in Europe. So the next time you'll see my face in this role will be at the gathering. So without further ado, go and get to bed if that's what's on your agenda in your part of the world, or grab a cup of coffee or have some lunch. And I really appreciate you joining us today. So thank you very much, everybody. Have a good time. Speak to you later. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks very much.